Hey guys, this is Anon, and today I'm going to talk about some big changes that are coming in Update 3.6 to medium tanks at Tier 9 and 10. Essentially what they've done is nerf the Tier 10 guns on Tier 10 and Tier 9 medium tanks. Specifically the penetration values. There's been a lot of reasoning for this. I'm not going to get into that a whole lot because I am not wargaming. I know they look at it as balancing and are essentially going to be giving a buff to heavy and tank destroyers classes. By doing this, I'm mostly interested about what this means to gameplay and what we can really see from these tanks that are receiving these nerfs and how it's going to kind of balance and adjust gameplay at 9 and 10. And so this video is going to focus mostly on that, showing a lot of those changes and just kind of talking about it a little bit. Most of these guns are going to see a nerf of about 25 to 30 millimeters of penetration on their standard AP ammo and around 30 millimeters of penetration on their premium ammunition. So that turns into the E50M and the STB being nerfed down to 245 on standard and 300 on premium. The Leo 1 and the Leo PTA are going down to 255 and 300 respectively, which is going to be the highest standard AP pen for medium tanks. The M48 is going down to 250 and also 300, pretty much right in line, and the lowest values we're going to see are the T62 and the Object 140 that are dropping down to 240 millimeters on their standard AP and 290 on their premium ammunition. Also, the T54 at Tier 9 is going to see a reduction of its heat pen down to 270. I feel like most people knew that was pretty overpowered heat, so that one's not quite as big of a surprise. Also rounding out the Tier 9 changes are the Type 61 dropping to 245 and 300, and the Centurion 7 at 255. With no change to the HESH ammo. Oh, and actually I forgot, the FV4202 at Tier 10 is dropping down to 255 as well. They share the same gun, but again, no changes to the HESH penetration values. Also being changed is a realignment of armor on the T54, the Object 140, and the T62A. They're calling it a realignment, and I think this is a little bit funky because they're not changing the statistical values of the turrets, but when you see the hit skins, and I'm going to get into this a little bit later, you can see that the armor is significantly nerfed on some of those turrets, and to me that's a little bit of false advertising because it is just simply not the same millimeters of armor. Okay, the first thing I want to look at are these turret nerfs. So I'm looking straight at the T62A, and I'm going to use an IS-7 for comparison in both of these, just so we have kind of standard pen numbers to look at. T62 has 260 millimeters of, or 240, I'm sorry, millimeters of turret armor, and you can see where the IS-7 is going to struggle frontally on that turret pretty much with any situation. Switching to the 3.6 update, you can see some pretty massive reductions on those fronts. The T62 still has an extremely strong turret. When you're moving around and hold down, I don't think it's going to be overly significant, but it does make it a lot more dangerous, especially for tank destroyers that are going to be able to pen those cheeks if you sit still. Switching to the Object 140, you can see again it's an extremely strong turret besides those commander hatches. Even with APCR, you can pen the cheeks, but it requires a lot of aiming. Switching to the patch 3.6 changes, this turret has really been knocked down hard. That is pretty weak turret. Even with AP, you can go through it quite a bit. Most premium ammunition, I think, on just about any tank is going to be able to get through that turret. So this is a pretty big nerf in my opinion, more than we see on some of the other tanks. But to be able to go through so many parts of the turret with AP is going to be a pretty big change there. So looking quickly at the T54 as well, I'm using the IS-8 just for similar comparisons. You can see that the turret of the T54 is strong, but it's not quite as strong as I think a lot of people get credit for. When you're shooting premium ammunition at it, the cheeks go pretty easily. Now in 3.6, you can see it's been hit very hard. With standard AP ammo in the lower pens, it's kind of hard to tell with the hit skins how it's going to go through because it's got some weird gradients going on. But as soon as you switch to premium ammunition, pretty much anything is going to go through it, especially at tier 9 and 10. So again, you're going to have to stay on the move a lot more. You should still get plenty of troll bounces because of the angling, but this is a pretty significant change from what we're used to. Okay, I want to take a look at some of how the adjusted pen values are going to work real time. There's a million combinations I could do with these, but I want to focus on the extreme. So this is an Object 140 looking down the barrel at some of the biggest heavies, some of the bigger armor you're going to run into. So you can see the APCR against E100s on the current setup can pretty much go through anything in the lower plate, but still can't go through the turret. But heat goes through 80 to 100% of the time of the cheeks, so it gets through really easily. The IS-7 can pretty much always get through the lower plate, but the upper plate has a little bit less, can still get through it fairly consistently though, just by aiming. Basically just getting a high roll with those heat rounds. So it makes a big difference that the mediums can face heavies basically head on and still get some penetrations. IS-7 of course is notoriously troll, so it's not going to work all the time. Now you can see, looking at an E5, plenty of weak spots here between the lower plate and the tumors up top, but with heat it can go through in plenty of ways. And similar with the IS-4, APCR is surprisingly functional against any of the front plate. That's why it's such a popular side scraping tank, and so it really doesn't struggle with it at all and can make quite an impact. So you can see a little bit why Wargaming wanted to change this. Heavy tanks are supposed to be frontline slugfests, and it doesn't always work with the current setup. Switching to the updated values for 3.6, you can still see APCR isn't going to have much impact. The biggest change though is now the heat has been nerfed to the point where it is essentially a RNG roll on the cheeks. For my math, it's about a 50-50 roll whether you're going to go through those cheeks or not. So that has a huge impact on especially heavy play, much more than I think medium play. Mediums are still can flank just fine, but you're going to have a little bit harder time fighting those from the... Okay, looking at the IS-7, which is one of the tanks I think is going to have the biggest impact from this, you can still see the APCR is going to have no problem going through that lower plate. Most tanks can get through it fine, nothing on the cheeks. Switch to heat though, and you can see how much stronger that upper plate is. It's basically 0% chance it can go through, and it's going to struggle a lot more with the pike at angles. The IS-7 is going to be so much stronger now. It's not like it wasn't strong to begin with. So it is going to be very, very difficult to kill with some of these Russian mediums, and pretty much with mediums in general. You can still get on the sides and even some of the sides of the turret, but that is a much more dangerous target now for mediums. Another pretty significant change that we're going to see in armor is to the IS-4. Standard APCR, or standard ammo, is going to have a really hard time with the front. Now, if you remember the hit scan from the current version, it was able to go through it pretty easily, even at angles. Now, you'll need heat to get through it, and it won't be a 100% roll either. It's going to be something more like a 60% chance when you're flush onto the armor. It also makes it a lot more dangerous side scraping. You can see all the red there. With heat or APCR, it's going to struggle a lot. So, big changes, I think, with that stuff. One of the main things I think to keep in mind is that not all of these mediums have the same pen. Some of them have a little bit more, so they won't struggle quite as much, but the obvious advantages that the 62 and the 140 have are going to start to be negated a little bit. Another tank I want to take a quick look at is the FV-4202, which is going to share penetration values with the Centurion 7, a tier lower. This is the updated 3.6 values, so no matter what, the 4202 wasn't going to get through the upper plate of an IS-7 very easily, or upper glacius, but was pretty easily able to go through the pike when it was heavily angled, and now it's going to share some of those values like the Russian tanks, and it'll be extremely hard to penetrate anywhere on the front. 4202 and Cent were always better as kind of flanking tanks that worked on the sides, but now it's going to be even more important because you just aren't going to be able to do a lot to the front of heavies unless you can get to that lower plate. Any upper glacius, any upper plates or superstructures, it's pretty much going to have no chance at with these new values. So quickly we'll have a look at the T-54 as well. This is the current pen values. That AP is pretty low pen, so against a super heavy like the STI, it's going to have no chance at the upper plate, but as soon as you switch to heat, not only can it get through that upper glacis, but it also can get through cheeks of the turret. And this is one of the most heavily armed tanks at tier 9 you're going to run into. So obviously most other tanks it's going to have an easier time with. So again, I was kind of looking at extremes here. The 3.6 changes are going to be significant. Still, it can get through that lower plate with the AP without a whole lot of problems. Can still do it fairly consistently. It's not even much of an RNG roll, but the main difference is this heat now has very, very low probability at the upper glacis, upper plate. It has no chance at the cheeks. Basically, these are just much, much stronger tanks at this point. So stuff you're going to have to keep in mind. You're really going to have more of that flanking mentality. So the main question I know I'm going to get is, am I upset about these nerfs? Honestly, I can say no, I'm not. That everybody is going to take this differently depending on what class you play and how you look at balancing in World of Tanks Blitz. So I personally enjoy playing all tank types, and so I like the buff that we'll see in heavies and tank destroyers, and I think you'll be able to see a lot more of that. I also understand why they did it. Medium tanks were never really designed to fight head-on, and this will force people to have more of that flanking role instead of seeing lots of medium spam that can really dominate the game. These tanks still have fantastic DPM. They have mobility. They have, a lot of them have some really strong armor. This E50M I think is going to be incredibly powerful, just because mediums won't be able to go through some of the armor. So it's going to change balancing in a lot of ways, and it's something you just have to adapt to. I've always had the mentality of, as the game changes, I will adapt with it, and I know not everybody has that same mentality, and that's totally okay. But I plan on adjusting to this, and I'll adjust my medium gameplay to suit and find ways to still be effective with it. These are still extremely powerful tanks, and when you're aiming, they can still handle most armor situations. So I don't think it is going to necessarily ruin the game. One of the things I want to point out, I was mentioning in the pen values that are nerfed, currently not on that list is the M60. Now I know the anger that will cause if the M60 ends up having a penetration advantage. I was talking to some people, and the balance team is going to evaluate that, so I'm not sure if when 3.6 goes live whether we'll see the M60 be nerfed or not, but I just wanted to put that out there so people were aware. If it's not on the list, M60s are going to be very, very dangerous and something you have to kind of prioritize as a heavy tank because they'll be able to get through you much easier. So lots of changes with 3.6. Be ready for these nerfs. I think everyone can adjust to them, no matter what the anger or happiness comes from it. Just learn from it, move on, and let's find out how to make these tanks still work for us, and just kind of take it as it comes. So thanks a lot, guys. Lots more stuff coming on 3.6, so keep an eye out.